If you watch videos on filmmaking, you've probably heard this advice. If you want cinematic video, you must follow the 180-degree shutter rule. But is this really true? Take a look at these shots. Does this look cinematic? Or this? Or this? What if I told you that during my recent trip to Hawaii, I never used an ND filter once, and I never followed the 180-degree shutter rule. I left the shutter speed in auto the entire time. When I was outside in bright sunlight, the shutter speed became very fast to control the exposure. But when it got darker, the shutter value slowed down to let more light in and raised the ISO. Now I shot everything on 2 cameras. The DJI action camera for the water shots, and my iPhone. So why do filmmakers and YouTubers constantly talk about the 180-degree shutter rule? Because the rule is real. The problem is that most people misunderstand what it's actually for. The 180-degree shutter rule doesn't create cinematic images. It creates natural look and motion blur, and those are not the same thing. The reason people associate it with a cinematic look is because movies has traditionally been shot this way for over 100 years, and we're used to seeing motion rendered with that amount of blur. But here's the thing. Most people never mention motion blur only affects things that are moving. If there isn't much movement in the shot, there isn't much motion blur to begin with. So let's look at what the rule actually does. Here's a fidget spinner. We're shooting at 30 frames per second and leaving the shutter in auto. And because it's a bright scene, the shutter speed becomes very fast to control the exposure. Notice how the spinner looks unusually sharp. If we pause the footage, there's very little motion blur, and it doesn't quite look the way we expected motion blur to look like in real life. Now let's shoot the same scene using the 180-degree shutter rule. We're at 30 frames per second, and that means the shutter speed should be 1/60. To maintain exposure, we add an ND filter. Notice how the spinner now has more blur in its movement. And side by side, the difference becomes obvious. The 180-degree shutter rule isn't making the image more cinematic, it's simply creating more motion blur. Now let's look at another example. Here are some birds flying. In this clip, the shutter is in full auto mode and very high to adjust the exposure correctly for a bright day. Now if we pause the clip, we see that the birds have very little motion blur, which can make footage look jittery. Next, let's do the same again with a fixed shutter speed. And if we pause it again, we see that the birds now have more motion blur. Now you may not realize this, but due to this motion blur, your eyes and brain see this as more natural movement. Now here's another example. I shot this helicopter scene in full auto, no ND filter. It's a bright day, so the shutter speed is extremely high. Notice the rotor blades. They don't have a smooth, natural look that we would normally see with our own eyes in real life. But if we pause the footage, the blades almost appear frozen in place. This is actually a perfect example of when I should have used the 180-degree shutter rule. The rotor blades look unnaturally sharp because the shutter speed is so fast. But here's the trade-off. If I'd stopped to attach an ND filter and dial everything in, I probably would have missed the shot completely. And for me, capturing the moment was more important. Now the same thing can happen with cars, bikes, sports, wildlife, or any fast-moving subject. Higher shutter speeds reduce motion blur, and when motion blur disappears, movement can start to look a little sharp or jittery or unnatural. If motion blur is important in your shot, then yes, the 180-degree shutter rule absolutely matters, especially when subjects are moving quickly through the frame. Now let's look at the other side of the argument. Every shot you've been watching throughout this video was filmed with the shutter speed left in auto. No ND filters, no carefully calculated shutter angles, and no worrying whether it was exactly at 1/60th of a second. Yet these shots still came out looking good. Why? Because we're really responding to its light, the composition, the colors, and the atmosphere. This sunrise shot doesn't suddenly stop looking beautiful because the shutter wasn't fixed at 180 degrees. The sunset scenes feel cinematic because of the mood, the framing, and the light. Even when people are moving through the frame, motion isn't the main subject. So the difference in motion blur becomes less noticeable. And that's the key point. The 180-degree shutter rule affects motion blur, and it doesn't magically create cinematic footage. I'm not saying the rule doesn't matter. It absolutely matters when motion blur is an important part of the shot. What I'm saying is that for many travel videos, landscapes, sunsets, city scenes, or walking shots and everyday movements, the difference is often much smaller than YouTube would have you believe. So, should you use the 180-degree shutter rule? Well, if you're filming sports, wildlife, vehicles, action scenes, or anything where natural movement blur is important, then yes, use it. But if you're traveling, exploring, documenting your vacation, or simply trying to capture movement as it happens, don't let the lack of an ND filter stop you from getting the shot. Because most viewers will notice great light, great composition, long before they notice your shutter speed. And a captured moment with the wrong shutter speed is almost always better than missing the shot entirely. Now, hopefully that helps you understand what and when motion blur is important and when it's not. Now, if you have an action camera, this is a completely different scenario. So watch the video over here, and I'll also link it in the description below. Okay, please subscribe for more content like this. Like and comment so YouTube pushes it out to more people so they can get a benefit from it. And leave a comment telling me if you follow the 180-degree rule or not, and if it's important to your style of filming. I'm really curious. Cheers, and I'll catch you next time.